A train is one of the safest ways to travel ever built. Billions of journeys and without a scratch. But when a railway fails, it can fail on a scale almost nothing else on land can match. Hundreds, sometimes well over 1,000 lives, lost in a matter of minutes. These are some of the deadliest train disasters in history. What went so terribly wrong, and the hard lessons each one left behind. Railway safety rarely improves in calm. It improves after tragedy. From a flooded coast in Sri Lanka to a frozen mountain in the Alps, each of these disasters exposed a hidden weakness and forced engineers to redesign the system so the same failure would be harder to repeat. This is the story of what went wrong and what we learned. December 26, 2004. Along Sri Lanka's southwestern coast, a crowded passenger train nicknamed the Queen of the Sea ran from Colombo toward Galle, only a few hundred meters from the open ocean. It was a holiday weekend, a Buddhist full moon day and the Christmas break, and the carriages were packed far beyond capacity, with well over 1,500 ticketed passengers and likely many more riding without tickets. Then the sea pulled back. Far out in the Indian Ocean, a massive earthquake had triggered a tsunami. A first wave washed over the track and stopped the train. Terrified villagers ran toward the carriages, believing the heavy steel train would keep them safe. Minutes later, a second, far larger wave arrived and lifted the entire train off the rails. The water smashed the 8 coaches into trees and houses, swept them clear of the embankment, and tore the village of Paralia apart. An estimated 1,700 people were killed in and around the train. It remains the deadliest single train disaster in history, and fewer than 150 people aboard are thought to have survived. Sri Lanka's seismic station had recorded the earthquake, but no one believed a tsunami would reach the island, and there was no way to warn the train in time. What changed was the warning itself. The disaster accelerated Indian Ocean tsunami alert networks and pushed railways to map coastal risk and to halt trains the moment a major seismic alert is raised. June 1981. In the Indian state of Bihar, a packed passenger train was crossing a bridge over the Bagmati River. It was the height of the monsoon. The train was severely overcrowded, with many traveling without tickets. The rain was relentless, and the river below ran swollen and fast against the bridge piers. As the train crossed, it left the rails, and several carriages plunged from the bridge into the floodwater below. One widely told account says the driver braked hard on the wet rails, perhaps to avoid an animal on the track, and the coaches skidded and jackknifed. In moments, hundreds of people were trapped beneath the surface. The official toll was more than 500, but with so many unrecorded passengers and so many never recovered from the river, estimates climbed toward 800. It is one of the deadliest rail accidents in India's history. Bihar forced hard questions about overcrowding, about how much weight a bridge can bear in flood, and pushed India toward monsoon speed limits and far stricter inspection of its bridges. December 1917. The First World War was grinding through Europe, and the railways were stretched to breaking point. In the French Alps, a train was prepared to carry soldiers home on leave from the Italian front, down a long, dangerously steep mountain line out of the Frejus Tunnel. More than 1,000 men were packed aboard 19 wooden carriages, pulled by a single locomotive where 2 were standard, leaving the train roughly 4 times the safe weight for that route. The driver knew it was unsafe. He warned the train could not be controlled on that gradient. But under wartime pressure, a transport officer overruled him and ordered it down. Only 3 of the 19 carriages had working air brakes. On the descent, the brakes overheated and failed, and the train accelerated to around 135 kilometers an hour before it tore itself apart on a curve. Wooden coaches, candles, and the soldiers' own munitions turned the wreck into an inferno. The official figure was 435 dead, but later estimates reach as many as 675, still the deadliest railway disaster in French history. The lesson was brutal and simple. Steep routes need strict weight and braking limits, and an engineer's warning must never be overruled by the pressure to keep moving. Just weeks later, the same war produced an almost identical tragedy in Romania. Near Ciurea station, a long train of around 26 carriages, pulled by 2 locomotives, was crammed with wounded soldiers and civilians fleeing the advancing front. People rode inside, on the roofs, and even between the coaches in deep winter snow. As the train descended a steep slope, its brakes gave out. A valve on the main brake line had reportedly been closed, and the connecting hoses damaged by passengers climbing over them, leaving only the locomotives able to brake. The runaway hit nearly 95 kilometers an hour. With the main track blocked ahead, a dispatcher diverted it into a tight loop, and at that speed the train had no chance. Almost every carriage derailed, some slamming into trackside fuel tanks that exploded into flame. Between 600 and 1,000 people were killed, one of the deadliest railway disasters ever recorded. Ciurea drove home 2 enduring rules. Brake systems must be shielded from passengers and cargo, and before any steep descent, every coach's brakes must be checked and connected. March 1944, in southern Italy. A heavy freight train, hauled by 2 steam locomotives, climbed toward a long tunnel near the village of Balvano. Officially, it carried goods, but in wartime hunger, hundreds of civilians had quietly climbed aboard, hoping to trade for food. Then, deep inside the tunnel, on the steep grade, the train stalled. This disaster had no fire, no crash, no sound. Because of wartime shortages, the locomotives burned poor-quality coal, which produced huge volumes of carbon monoxide. The tunnel was nearly 2 kilometers long and barely ventilated. As the stalled engines kept working, that invisible, odorless gas filled the tunnel, and carbon monoxide binds to the blood and quietly shuts out oxygen. Within about half an hour, almost everyone aboard had lost consciousness. Rescuers reaching the tunnel hours later found most of the passengers and crew already dead. Official figures list 517 killed, though some accounts put the toll above 600. Balvano changed the rules for tunnels. Tighter limits on train weight and traction in long enclosed sections, controls on unauthorized passengers, and the slow march toward proper ventilation and gas safety underground. Fast forward to June 1998. The railways had entered the high-speed age. Germany's gleaming ICE train was a point of national pride, racing across the country at around 200 kilometers an hour, smooth and modern and apparently flawless. Surely, by now, with a century of hard lessons behind them, the deadliest disasters were history. But inside one of its wheels, a tiny fatigue crack had been quietly growing. To cut noise, the wheel wrapped a steel tire around a rubber-cushioned core. At full speed, that tire shattered, caught a switch in the track, and threw the train into a road bridge that collapsed onto the carriages. 101 people died. Eschede forced high-speed rail to grow up. Solid one-piece wheels, ultrasonic crack testing, and strict tracking of every component's life became non-negotiable. Set side by side, the human cost is staggering and uneven. Sri Lanka, the deadliest of all. Ciurea, Maurienne, Balvano, Bihar, each measured in hundreds of lives. And Eschede, with 101, a reminder that even the most modern railway is not immune. These were never just accidents. Each was a system failing in its own particular way. And yet the same villains appear again and again. Trains loaded far beyond their design limits. Brakes that could not hold. Natural forces no one had planned for. Combustible coaches, fuel, and gases that turned a wreck into something far worse. And warnings about the weather, the load, the brakes, the wheel, that went unheard until it was too late. Today, rail is one of the safest ways to travel because of, not despite, these tragedies. Tsunami alerts, monsoon inspections, brake continuity checks, tunnel ventilation, solid wheels. Each was written into the rulebook by a disaster. Railway safety doesn't improve because accidents are forgotten. It improves because each disaster forces engineers to redesign the system so the same failure is harder to repeat.